Okay, one of the things that I've figured out over the last years is this is a good proposition. So, it's pretty self-evident that life has got its rat's nest of miseries, and that's for sure. And maybe you could even make a categorical statement that life is mostly a rat's nest of misery. And you can make a pretty powerful argument for that. But then there's a counter question, which is, well, what if you tried not to make it any more miserable than it had to be, right? Then what would it be like? And my suspicions is that a lot of that misery, I would suspect that most of that misery would go away, because it's the unnecessary misery that really brings you down. It's like, well, if someone has cancer, it's like, that sucks. But it's not like you can say, if only we had done this differently, then that wouldn't have happened. But when someone's out like torturing you in a malevolent way, or maybe you're doing the same, you can always ask yourself, well, is this really necessary? Is this just like a useless add-on to the miseries of life? That's what disheartens people. And so even in your own life, if you aren't suffering from self-imposed misery, and you're only suffering from inescapable misery, maybe you could handle that, and you could survive, you could bear it, and even maybe without becoming irredeemably corrupt. And so the goal would be, well, yeah, life is a rat's nest of miseries, and maybe it has no ultimate meaning. We could say that if we're feeling particularly pessimistic, but it still leaves one question open, which is, if you didn't do everything you could to make it worse, how good could you make it be? And the least answer is, well, it could be tragedy, but maybe not hell. And I think that's right. I really believe that. That's the most pessimistic proper statement. The worst case outcome in the worst of all possible worlds is that your life could be tragic but not hell. And that's a lot better than hell, right? And you think, I could give you an example of the difference. You're at your mother's deathbed. Well, that's tragedy. Here's another scenario. You're at your mother's deathbed, and all you and all your idiot siblings are arguing. Well, that's the difference between tragedy and hell. And you might be able to tolerate the first circumstance, and maybe it would even bring you closer together with your family members. The second one, no one can bear that. You walk away from a situation like that sick of yourself and sick of everything else too. And it's often the case that tragic circumstances bring out the dragons, because the stress is high and all those things that people haven't dealt with, they don't have the energy to repress, and all the bitterness comes pouring forward. It's like, seriously, man. So that's actually it's a rough lesson, but it's a good hallmark for figuring out whether or not you've got yourself adjusted properly and in relationship to your siblings. It's like, if you were all gathered around the bed of someone close who was dying, could you manage it? And if the answer is no, it's like, well, put your life together, because it's going to happen. And you should be the person who's there that can do it, and do it properly. And then maybe you'd find that it isn't the sort of thing that will undermine your faith in life itself. And I've seen both of those situations, ugly situations, murderously ugly situations. And then they're opposite, where people have had terrible things happen to them as a family, and they pull together and they rebuild their damn ship and they sail away. And so that seems to me to be a lot better. That makes you Noah when the flood comes, right? Well, okay, so the same thing. The question emerges, well, who are you? Well, you could say, you're this plan. That's how people usually identify. Maybe they have no plan at all and they're just in chaos, right? That's like being in the belly of the beast. They're nihilistic in chaos. They have no plan. They're just chaos itself. And that's a very dreadful situation for people to be in. Or maybe they conjure together a plan. That's their identity. It's kind of fragile, and they're holding on to that with everything they've got. It's their little stick of wood that they're floating in the ocean, clinging to. And so they're identifying really hard with that plan. That's what happens when you're an ideologue, is that you're identifying really hard with that plan. The problem is something comes up to confront it. Well, how do you act? Well, you can't let go of the plan, because you drown. Then you cling to it rigidly. Well, that's no good, because then you can't learn anything. And then if that's you're a totalitarian, you're not going to learn anything. You're going to end up in something that's close enough to hell so that you won't know the difference, and you might drag everyone along with you. And that's happened plenty of times, right? It's the whole story of the 20th century. It happened over and over and over. And it happens in people's states. It happens in their business organizations. It happens in their cities. It happens in their provinces. It happens in their states, and it happens in their psyches, all at the same time. You can't blame the manifestation of that sort of thing on any of those one levels. It happens when a society goes down that way, it goes down everywhere at the same time. It's not the totalitarians at the top and all the happy people striving to be free at the bottom. It's not that at all. It's totalitarianism at every single level of the hierarchy, including the psychological. And so you don't want to be the thing, you don't want to be in chaos, that's for sure, but you don't want to be the thing that clings so desperately to the raft that you can't let go when someone comes to rescue you, right? You don't want to be that. So then you think, well, exactly what are you? You're not the chaos, you're not the plan. Maybe you're the thing that confronts the obstacle. And I would say that's the categorical lesson of psychology insofar as it has to do with personal transformation. Because that's what you always teach people in psychotherapy. I don't care what sort of psychotherapist you are. You're always teaching them the same thing. You're the thing that can, you're not the plan. You're the thing that can confront the obstacle to the plan. And then when you know even further that the obstacle is not only an obstacle, but opportunity itself, well then your whole view of the world can change, because you might think, well, I've got this plan, something came up to object to it. It's like, it's possible that the thing that's objecting has something to teach you that will take you to the place where you develop an even better plan. And it's a nice framework to use. It's like, are you so sure that this is a problem? Is that the only way that you can look at it? Or is it an opportunity? I mean, I'm not trying to be, naively optimistic. There are some things that's pretty hard to extract gold from some dragons, and maybe the death of a family member is a good example of that. But even in a situation like that, I can tell you that it's an opportunity for maturation, that's for sure. And the thing is, you might say, well, it's pretty miserable to be digging for gold when someone's falling into the grave. Well, if they really love you, first of all, that's what they'll want you to do. And second, you're going to make their death a lot more palatable experience for them if you're someone who can be in the room and be helpful instead of be, quivering in the corner and feeling that the entire world is collapsing in on you. I mean, that's another, you want to be the useful person at the funeral. How's that for a goal? That's a good goal, man. You know that you've got yourself together in a situation like that because you're going to be at them. And maybe you want to be the person on whose shoulder people cry. That'd be a good goal. And it's kind of, I don't like being naively optimistic. So when I tell you to get your life together, I'm not going to say roses and sunshine. It's like, that's pablum for fools. But it really is something to be the reliable person at a funeral, right? And you can aim at that, you can do that. You got to be tough to do that, because it also means that you can sustain a major loss without collapsing. And that, you've got to be a monster to do that, right? So here you go. This is from the Wonderlic people. They're a commercial company that makes general cognitive ability tests, and it's often used by corporations, even though it's actually illegal. It's actually illegal to use IQ tests, but the Wonderlic doesn't promote themselves as testing IQ. I think it's general cognitive ability, which is the same thing, but whatever. The SATs, the GREs, the LSATs, all of those are IQ tests. So now they're more crystallized than fluid, and we'll get to that in a minute. But crystallized knowledge is what you accrue across time. So you could say that fluid intelligence is what programs your brain. It fills it with facts, let's say. It fills it with knowledge. But you can get an estimate of your intelligence by sampling your domain of factual knowledge. And the reason for that is that, well, obviously, the better the programmer, the better the content. And so what that also means is that you could, if your prefrontal cortex was damaged later in life, your fluid IQ could plummet, but your crystallized IQ remain more or less intact. So even though they're not different, one produces the other, and then once the producer has produced, then the producer can disappear, and you've still got the encoded knowledge. So at least that's how it looks to me. So, okay, so how smart do you have to be different things in life? Well, if you have an IQ of 116 to 130, which is 85th percentile and above, so it's one person in 8 up to one person in 130, I believe is 85, 90, 95, is it 95? I think it's 95. One person in 8 to one person in 20. Then you can be a attorney, a research analyst, an editor, an advertising manager, a chemist, an engineer, an executive manager, etc. That's now, that's not the high end for IQ, by the way. That it can go up, well, it can go up indefinitely, although there's fewer and fewer people as it goes up. So if you want to be the best at what you're doing, bar none, then having an IQ of above 145 is a necessity, and maybe you're pushing 160 in some situations, and maybe that's making you one person in 10,000 or even one person in 100,000. And then also, to really be good at it, you probably have to be reasonably stress tolerant and also somewhat conscientious. So you know, people, when you think, well, why is it that smart people are at the top of dominance hierarchies? And the answer to that in part is because they get there first. Right? I mean, everything's a race, roughly speaking, and the faster you are, the more likely you are to be at the forefront of the pack, and intelligence in large part is speed. That's not all of it is. So if you're moving towards something difficult rapidly, the faster people are going to get there first. So IQ of 110 to 115, so that's 85th to 73rd to 85th percentile. Copywriter, accountant, manager, sales analyst, general manager, purchasing agent, registered nurse, sales account executive. If you look at universities, the smartest people are, they're above this. Who are the smartest people at university? What do you think? Mathematicians, physicists and mathematicians, right. I could tell you who's on the other end, but I won't. Yeah, I'd like to though. Anyways, okay. Going down now 103 to 108 is slightly above average, right? 60th to 70th percentile. Store manager, bookkeeper, credit clerk, lab tester, general sales, telephone sales, accounting clerk, computer operator, customer service rep, technician, clerk, typist. So you see at this level, people have some technical skill and some ability to deal with complex things. Okay, that's dead average. 100 is average. Dispatcher in a general office, police patrol officer, receptionist, cashier, general clerical, inside sales clerk, meter reader, printer, teller, data entry, electrical helper. 95th to 98. Machinist, food department manager, quality control checker, security guard, unskilled labor, maintenance, arc welder, die setter, mechanic. Good IQ range for relatively qualified tradespeople. 87 to 93. Messenger, factory production worker, assembler, food service worker, nurse's aide, warehouseman, custodian, janitor, material handler, packer. Now, what you're starting to see is that as you move down the hierarchy, the jobs get simpler, they're more likely to be assigned by other people, or they're repetitive. Because what IQ predicts to some degree is how rapidly you can learn something, but once you've learned it, it doesn't predict necessarily how well you do at it. And so the more repetitive jobs people with lower IQs are more suited to more repetitive jobs. Under 87, is there something? Well, no. Right. That's a big problem. And it's something our society has not addressed at all. Jobs for people with IQs of less than 85 are very, very rare. So what the hell are those people supposed to do? It's like it's 15% of the population. What are they supposed to do? Well, we better figure it out, because one of the things that's happening too is that as the high IQ tech geeks get a hold of the world, the demand for cognitive power is increasing, not decreasing, right? You want to be a teller? Well, you know, those checkout machines, they're not so simple. You want to work at McDonald's? You think that's a simple job? You don't see robots working at McDonald's. And the reason for that is that what McDonald's workers do is too complex for robots to do. So this is a discussion that no one wants to have, but that's okay. It's still a problem, and it has to be dealt with. So the US government, I think I told you this at one point already, it's illegal to induct anyone into the US Army if they have an IQ of less than 83, right? It's about 10% of the population. Because the US Army, and they've been doing IQ testing since IQ testing began, because they want everybody they can possibly get into the Army, because in peacetime, they use it as a way of moving people up the socioeconomic ladder, and in wartime, well, obviously, you need as many soldiers as you can get your hands on. And so you're not going to be any pickier than you have to be. So when the US Army says it's illegal to induct anybody into the armed forces if they have an IQ of less than 83, then you know that they've done it for absolute necessity. Right? And when people have made a finding that contradicts what they want to hear, and they're doing it out of absolute necessity, you can be reasonably true that it's one of those facts that just won't bloody well go away. And so you might think, well, if there's nothing for someone with an IQ of less than 83 to do in the Army, what makes you think that there's something that they can do in the general population? And then the issue is, you know, because the conservatives will say, well, they should just work harder. It's like, sorry, that ain't going to fly. And the liberals will say, well, there's no difference between people anyhow, and you can just train people to do everything, and that's wrong. So they're both wrong, and they're seriously wrong. And the fact that neither side of the political perspective will take a good, cold, hard look at this problem means that we're going to increasingly have a structural problem in our societies, because we're complexifying everything so rapidly that you can't find employment unless you're intelligent. You guys are really going to face this, you know. Lawyers are disappearing like mad. And the reason for that is, you can look it up online. Increasingly, you can do things yourself if you're smart. And so, like, the working class people have been wiped out pretty nicely over the last 30 years by automation and various other things. It's the low end of the white collar class that's coming up next. So I'm not saying that lawyers are in the low end, but low end lawyers are in the low end of the white collar class. So there's still going to be plenty of positions for people who are creative and fast on their feet and super smart. In fact, those people are going to have all the money, and that's already happening to a great degree. You know, because if you're smart and you can use a computer, you're so smart it's just absolutely unbelievable, right? And if you can't use a computer, and lots of people, and I don't mean, you know, you can open Word, that isn't what I mean. I mean, maybe I mean you can program, and if you can't program, well, you're right at the next end. So if you haven't got that with you, you're going to be left behind.
What's going to happen then when that happens, when you have...
Oh, a lot of them will take Demerol. That's what's happening in the United States. Yeah, it's an opiate. Yeah, so there's a massive drug problem emerging in...
Under 83 or whatever,
yeah.
Is about 15% of the population.
Yeah, no, I'm telling you, that is what's happening.
Seems like that percent of the population is going to increase.
Yes. Drugs. Yeah, drugs of abuse. Well, what is happening to a large degree is people drop out of the employment race. They get very depressed. They develop chronic pain problems, especially if they're men, because chronic pain and depression are very much the same thing. And then they subsist on opiates, which are subsidized by Medicaid in the US. I'm not kidding about this. This is exactly what's happening. What else is going to happen to people for whom there's nothing to do? They have a terrible time, especially if they're conscientious. That's a good question. You know, the AI guys are pushing hard on this. Hey, what's the biggest employment category? Driver. Think about it. What's Tesla doing? What are all the AI guys working on as fast as they possibly can? Driverless cars. No problem, except that's the biggest employment category for men. So what are those guys going to do? Yeah, they're going to sit home and, you know, be miserable with their wives and take opiates because they have chronic pain problems. Right, nasty. And you might think, well, could they think up something else to do? Well, if you have an IQ of 83 or less, you're not going to be doing a lot of thinking about something else to do. You know, that isn't how it works, because you're more of a, you're an act person, not a thinking person, roughly speaking. You know, and so if you have a task at hand, especially if you're conscientious, you can diligently go about it. But, you know, I've tried to train people with IQs of 80 and less to do what I would consider tasks that one of you could learn to do in 10 minutes and never make a mistake again. And it's like tens of hours with bare minimum mastery of the tasks. So, yeah, it's an ugly situation, no doubt about it. But let's talk about addiction. So, there's a series of actions that occur before you take your cocaine. Some of those are local. They're the things that happen immediately before, and some of those are distal. They're farther back in the chain of events. And when you have a hit of cocaine, it produces a dopaminergic burst, and that feels really good, but it also makes the circuits that were immediately active before that grow. That's what reinforcement is. And then the growth is proportionate, not linearly, but it's proportionate to how long before that event occurred. The closer it is, the stronger they're going to get. But even the ones that are somewhat distal get some reinforcement. Because you might say, well, what did you do before you found your latest fix? And the answer is, well, how long before? Well, the closer, the more rewarded. And so what happens then is that, so if you take that person out of the normal environment, you put them into a treatment center, they're off their physical addiction, which is a weird thing in the case of cocaine, but like not that long. A week will do it, 2 weeks for sure. Even heroin and alcohol for sure, if you can get them through the seizure part without dying, And so they're done. They aren't physiologically dependent anymore. But you let that person go, and the first thing that happens is his old friend, who he's always out doing drugs with, shows up, and bang, he's craving like mad. And that's because that thing in there is not dead at all. And it's activated by the cue. And it's a circuit. It's not. It's a personality. It only wants one thing. It wants cocaine. It's going to suppress any non-related thoughts, and it'll use lies. That's no problem, especially if lies have been reinforced, which they certainly have. Where are you off to, son? You know, you'll have a lie for that, and then 10 minutes later you have your drug, and so that little lie has just grown. Or maybe you think you've tried to quit, and you think, to hell with it, and every time 10 minutes before you take your drug you think, to hell with it, and you do that 1,000 times. Well, believe me, the to hell with it circuit, that sucker is strong. And so it's alive, and it's not like it just disappears. It can't. It's you. It's grown in there. Now, you can build another circuit to shut it down, and you can help it decompose across time by not giving it what it wants. But you're going to have to not give it what it wants in all of the multiple contexts that you've already associated with the drug. Some of you have probably smoked and then tried to quit smoking, and what you'll see is you get a craving when you have a cup of coffee, or when you're finished dinner, or when you're done having a phone call, or when you first get up in the morning, or whenever you've regularly had the drug, whatever you had the drug in relationship to. Even complex things like ending a conversation will produce a cued craving. And so then that can extinguish over time if you punish it by either punishing it or not letting it get what it wants. But a lot you have to build another circuit to just shut it down. And then that circuit's kind of fragile, and stress can often disrupt it. So
that can be mediated by some of these books that people read about quitting smoking, or things like ibogaine.
Oh sure, well part of that, well ibogaine's a whole different thing, because it seems to have a direct physiological effect. But you know, the addiction has a cognitive component. It's full of thoughts and desires and wants, and you know, you may have to rebuild your whole personality in order to get that thing cornered. Religious conversion, for example, is a really effective treatment for alcoholism. That's partly why Alcoholics Anonymous works for the people for whom it does work. But religious conversion, which is total personality conversion, is actually one of the few things that we know of that's an effective treatment for alcoholism. We don't know how to induce it. But although that's not exactly true either, because the early work with LSD was quite promising as a treatment for alcohol addiction. And there's recent work with psilocybin showing that if people have a mystical experience when you give them psilocybin, their success rate in quitting smoking is about 80%, which is way higher than any pharmacological intervention for smoking has ever been.